I would like to welcome on stage Mr. Vishal Gautam, Director of Engineering, India Operations at Zscaler. Mr. Manish Jain, Lead Manager, Information Security, Infosys. Mr. Aseem Ahmed, Senior Product Manager, Cloud Security, Asia Pacific and Japan at Akamai Technologies. And Vivek Sarkale, Consultant DSCI, to host the session. I would request Vivek to set the context for the session.
Check. Good afternoon, all. Good afternoon. Yeah, thank you. So, thanks for joining the session. So, I have with me eminent panelists today to discuss the zero trust. So, I'll just give a brief what exactly we're going to discuss today. So, I'm going to go and talk about what exactly zero trust is, why zero trust, and how that we're going to implement zero trust. So I have Aseem with me, who is going to talk about the zero trust readiness for the organizations, and then I have Vishal from the Zscaler, who is going to more talk about where to start when in terms of zero trust, and then Manish is from the user organization Infosys, who will talk about is this zero trust really working for the organizations or it's just buzzword. So let's start, and I would like to keep this session more interactive. I hope you'll ask some hard questions and we'll be able to answer those questions. Okay? Sure. So just to begin with, right? So what is zero trust? I just wanted to start, and then quick analogy that I wanted to give. Everyone, we go to the hotels and then we do a check-in, right? So in a security, if I connect that that approach, then we do check-in, we do present some proof, and they trust us, and then they allow to enter their particular premises, right? So the security approach earlier was that more of the verify. Or maybe a trust but verify. But if you talk about particularly about zero trust, it is more of don't trust but always verify. So it is a new approach that coming into the zero trust, which around which this particular concept is actually conceptualized or based. So just quick example: if any employee is walking out to the hotel, and if it's getting validated by the check-in counter, and he's getting the access card, he's going to the elevator. So he get that access card to go to that respective floor, right? For example, he has to go to the 7th floor. But what if that access, through that access, he can use that particular card to go to the different floors and make some disturbance to the other, the fellow staying people. So that's actually a problem. So if you that's actually a traditional model of a security, right? But if you compare that with the zero security, how you change that differently? With the same access card, if that same person entering into the elevator, that he has only access. For example, he's staying in a 5th floor. So with his access card, he can only go to that particular 5th floor. He cannot go to the other floor. He cannot access those access card to go to the other floors. So he has done, the hotel has done some kind of a micro access management for that particular person. That is something is coming under the zero trust. That you're not trusting that person, irrespective if it is an internal person or maybe external person, where to that person should be landing. Though you're doing the micro segmentation of that particular access. This is something based on this particular analogy. Everyone likes analogy, and it's very simpler to understand the concepts. So based on that, I think zero trust is particularly the best. And then so this is our traditional model we have. So if we talk about security, we usually talk about the two things, like external threat actors and internal threat actors. In our traditional model, we are more concerned about the external threat actors, right? That we used to have the firewalls, next generation firewalls, IDS, IPS, a lot of security measures at the firewall level. But usually what happened that we never think about something which is something a threat which could come from our internal premises, internal organization employees, right? So it's a complete understanding phenomena. So traditionally we used to have definitely the external firewalls and external security controls, but what about internal security? So in today's world, if you see the digitized world, applications and everything is moving onto the cloud, and then we have the maximum n number of users at the same time accessing the same applications. So it is creating kind of overburden on the security controls as well. So in that particular scenario, in the today's API economy, security is no more the perimeter security problem. It has gone to the endpoint level. So applying the right security control, doing the micro segmentation of a security control at endpoint level is very critical. So based on that, this security zero trust is completely underlying. Excuse me. So in search of variety of devices, as I mentioned, in the digital world, we have multiple devices accessing the same application from different geographies. In case of mobile workforce, we have a lot of mobile devices accessing the same application from different geographies, and growing use of a cloud-based services, maybe platform-based services or infrastructure-based services, and in the scale and volume of that data transaction. For example, I'll take the example of a financial ecosystem. The way the UPI story coming into the picture, the way the way we are going towards the financial inclusion, the number of transactions that we do today, it's significantly increased from last 4 to 5 years. In that particular volume and scale, we definitely cannot rely on the traditional security mechanisms, right? So zero trust. Then what are those facets of zero trust? That actually are at the center point of this particular concept. So the first is that don't trust, but always verify. That's a very critical parameter. And then need to know privileges, right? We also call it as a least privilege based access control, right? So you give access to the person who required that particular access. For example, for the finance guy, who is accessing only finance data. So for him, you need to give a specific access of those financial assets, the financial files. Other person who is on the different role, different designation, he may not want to access those particular files. So you give the access based on the need to know basis, based on the least privilege access control. So this is very much required. And then the security, always we talk about, there are two kind of things, the content driven and there is a context driven, right? So I think zero trust model is more of a context driven security, understanding the each and every parameter that can contribute to the security. It's a very small example that, so our title itself is not a zero trust of just network, it is a zero trust of a people, network, devices. It's all about everything. Understanding that small parameter, from where user is accessing the particular application, what's the role of that particular user, understanding the context behind that particular access request. So considering all these parameters, considering all those dots in order to take your access decision, it is something called as a content or maybe context driven security. Then definitely the using underlying means, I was talking with the gentlemen before we begin the discussion, that we usually not utilizing the hardware as much as we can for the authentication authorization. So utilizing those underlying devices for the authentication and authorization is also very critical. And then the risk-based approach, which is we already talk about much in terms of authentication authorization, which is the first line of defense we talk about. So how you include those risk-based approach in terms of your access decisions. And then at the final stage, like how you do a micro level segmentation, very granular access control, the way I have given example of the particular hotel access, right? So how you incorporate all these components all together and ensure the zero trust, that's very critical. Then so this is what I would talk about, right? That you should not trust anything, right? You even for example your own employee. Just small example I would like to give. You have work from home policy. If you have one employee who just working from home and there is another employee who's attending the office on the same day, so kind of same security check that they go through, irrespective of their network location, whether they are externally sitting or they are whether internally sitting. So they go under the same kind of security check before they are logging into their system, before they are accessing any devices or application that is hosted on a cloud or maybe on the on-premises. So the underlying, or maybe in a nutshell, is that you should not trust anything. So there are some myths about zero trust, right? The first myth about zero trust is that we talk about zero trust is a product, or maybe a zero trust is a something which is a solution. But it's not a product. It's not a solution. It's actually a way of thinking, or it's an architecture, right? How you think about zero trust to implement in your organization. It's not a solution. It's not a product. The second myth we talk about is the next generation perimeter, right? It's like next generation firewalls. So it's not a firewall. It's actually, we see in the approach, right? There are 6 or 7 facets of zero trust security which help to implement those security. And then there are realities. What are the realities and what are the things that comes into mind? So it is the architectural state of mind, that how you architect your security from your definitely based on your risk appetite and your risk analysis. And then another aspect of it is so another aspect is the least privilege. So combining all these dots together, right? Least privileges, contextual access, and adaptive controls. So with the help of least privilege control and contextual access, which we talk about, definitely you can ensure security. But what about the how cognitive your architecture is? For example, if tomorrow there is some new solutions, there is new authentication methods, or there are some new phenomena coming into the picture, how easily you adopt those particular technologies in your particular architecture? I think this is what zero trust is all about, and in the nutshell, it is something that the first step that verify actually the who that particular person is, who is trying to access the particular assets, then contextualizing the request, considering the different parameters before we are taking the decisions, then secure admin environment, definitely, because the admin is at the center of any system. And then the grant least privileges, given the access to the user based on need to know basis, what is required, and something that audit everything. Just make sure that you are giving the access to the right person to the right assets. And third is adaptive control, that how your solution, how your architecture is adaptive to the new technologies, new methodologies, and new standards. I think this is all about zero trust. Now I'll hand over to Aseem, who is going to talk about how's the readiness about the zero trust. And coming from the solution provider, I would like to hear from you, Aseem. Thanks.
All right. Thank you all for waiting patiently. Sorry for the technical hiccup here. Okay. So while we heard about what zero trust is, some foundation knowledge of zero trust, I'm sure, helps here. I'm going to be talking specifically about why should you care about zero trust and what should you do to assess your readiness, right? Because zero trust, as my colleague explained here, is not a product. It's not a concept that was never there before. They've changed the name. The industry knows it by the name zero trust, but this has been existing from a very long time in different security philosophies, architectures, conversations. Now it's about putting it all together and letting you make robust security architectures that can help you implement security in a way where you never trust but always verify, right? And this is not to be taken in a spirit of, okay, it's not about just not trusting anything, but it's about making sure that you apply the principle of always authenticating and authorizing the users. Again, like for example in military, they do it all the time. You need to have a clearance level from different layers before you can approach any asset. This is the same thing that we do here. So let's talk about the readiness perspective as to what are the things that you need to be careful about, or what are the things that you need to assess from that perspective. Okay, that's the stage fright for any speaker. Your clicker doesn't work. Can I get the slides? Yes. Okay, one slide back, please. Yes. Okay. So assessing your zero trust readiness involves many things. First thing that you need to be looking at is assessing what the current state is, right? Now what I mean by current state is you need to look at, okay, what is the current access setup for the users, right? you need to assess where the users are. Because users and network is inside out now. Your users could be anywhere, your applications could be anywhere, especially with advancement in cloud and adoption in cloud. This is where we're talking about zero trust now, because your data is not just within your premises. That was good times, good old times when you just could see your data. Now you can't. Then you have, what are the different application protection methods that you have currently? How are you protecting your user and data right now? What are the existing threat prevention mechanisms? Do you monitor the activity from inside network and what comes from outside network? What are different solution integrations that you have? So this is typically your assessment when you're looking at even building a case of why you should embrace zero trust. Then it's outlining the use case. Now that you have an assessment done, then how do you outline a use case of pitching it to the management or the stakeholders? Why do you really need? That's why you start building the use cases. Then you move towards review and validate. This is where you need to look at the phase 1 where you collected the data about your assessment, moving it to the phase 3 where you talk about, okay, this is how my current state is, and this is how the best practice of this is what the best practice states for zero trust architecture. What are the gaps? This is about assessing the gaps, reviewing the data and validating if this is going to hold true for your organization. This is typically, you look at what are the current gaps in your current security model, what are the gaps that you identified in the user access. For example, it could be that you rightly not classified the data before, that you really do not have the right user classification being done. Those are the things that could come out from your assessment phase and feed back into the review and validate phase, right? Then it's talking about, okay, now you've done this, how do you position that to the board or the funding team, right? For you to get the funding for zero trust implementation. And this is where you talk about, this is why it is dangerous, these are the existing gaps, this is how you can save or consolidate your OPEX and CAPEX, right? Because ultimately it all boils down to the money. If you go, I promise to you, if you go to your security sponsors talking about that I want to buy a new thing, I'm sure you're not going to be hearing very pleasant things back, right? Because every day we just walk in and we say, hey, we want to get the best of breed technology, we want human behavior analysis, we want, new generation firewalls, and this is an endless investment that needs to, and obviously board cares about investment, and it's rightly so. So how much should they really spend? That all boils down to what are the risks that they want to cover, what are the areas that they want to address, and this is why when you go to a recommendation phase to your board of directors or the security sponsors, you really need to have a very robust plan and strategy, right? I just heard from one of my colleagues today, security is about negotiations, right? And the negotiations only play well when you have right data to show, right? We can't just walk in and say, hey, I want the best of breed for everything when you don't have anything to show. So while you've done your groundwork in terms of taking the assessment, building a business case and looking at, the gaps, you go to a recommended section where you recommend to the committee, okay, this is why I want to why I want to implement the zero trust. And then you finally go to an implementation phase where you start implementing different security architectures, right? What will really help you is where you're able to showcase how much you can consolidate together. Because as I mentioned, many of these technologies in zero trust is nothing new. You still use your firewalls, you still use your maybe IDPs, you still use your identity and access management solutions. Some of them, yes, sure, are newer, some of them are still legacy, and you just club them together to build a robust architecture, right? So if you can show that you're going to be having the, cut in your OPEX and CAPEX, it helps them visualize that, yes, there is a cost saving somewhere, right? It's not only about incurring more costs. And then you finally go to implementation phase where you implement the architecture. Obviously, you cannot expect to succeed 100% at first. They're always going to be learning of what you implement, take it back, validate, improvise on things. So this is how typically, from the assessment or the readiness perspective, key elements for you to assess. Now, how has zero trust evolved over a period of time? It started with micro-segmentation, right? And this is what also happened to Akamai. I mean, we are the world's largest distributed computing platform of more than 240,000 servers. But we realized that hey, we didn't have to worry about our network segmentation because the users are not for our network. The users for the applications, right? So we never wanted users to have access to our network because obviously we deliver a very sensitive and rich content through the internet for some of the biggest clients, on this planet. So we defined that micro-segmentation will not really work for us because obviously it was a very costly affair. You have to always play like a catch-up game. You have a micro-segmented today, but then there's a new user that pops up. There has to be dynamic policing. Now you have to kind of redo the whole thing over and over, and it becomes a challenge, right? That's why you move to a software-defined perimeter where you're trying to look at the concept of identity, okay? Making sure that the right user has access to the right application. Instead of having access to the whole network, you move towards software-defined perimeters. Now, the other side is where you're moving to towards an identity-aware proxy, which is, hey, you're not only authenticating the users or maintaining the privileged access, but you're also looking at providing a seamless performance over top of it, right? It's not only about identity and access management. Can you stop your applications being attacked from different application layer vectors, right? For example, can a WAF being integrated with the platform of Zero Trust, right? This is why you start thinking about more and more solutions that can all be integrated together and get you a simplified yet very powerful management platform that is identity-aware proxy. This is typically what a Zero Trust architecture would look like. Again, there are various Zero Trust architectures. Every organization might implement it in a different way. Akamai does this in this way for our different customers. So you have all the services being delivered from the edge platform. And what's so powerful about this is instead of worrying about having a point solution on your data center or on a specific cloud, you can think of providing the service from the edge platform, which cuts across multiple data services, multiple data providers. So it doesn't really matter if you're using a cloud A or cloud B for doing infrastructure as a service or software as a service, or you have your own data center, you can implement the Zero Trust model using a layered approach on the edge platform. So instead of letting traffic through all the way from the internet to your data centers or the cloud providers, you can offload that on the edge platform itself, right? So you don't run into a risk of letting the attacker door. It's like if you let the thief out to your doorstep, the only thing that stands between a thief and you is the security of the door, right? So you already cut down the multiple layer into one layer, which is the door. With edge services, you can put the attacks far away from your data centers or cloud services onto the cloud, which is edge. So you can do like threat protection, DDoS, WAF, bot management, identity, application access, all that securing your corporate access, your network on the edge platform itself. Now I just want to share, the story of how we've achieved this. And again, Zero Trust is not a small solution that can be achieved overnight. Zero Trust is a journey on which organization embrace. The ultimate goal is obviously to have a very secure and robust architecture so that you can always verify every access attempt, right? It's about understanding that your network and your data and your users are always acting up in a hostile environment, and you create a boundary to overcome that. So this is a story of how Akamai has achieved it. Our goal was we do not trust anything as inside. We realize that the users and applications have long gone over the cloud. They are everywhere. They want access everywhere. Hence, we do not take anything as inside. We always treat everything as outside. No VPN. So we want to get away from the concept of VPN, which is basically, we've realized that VPN, great technology built to give secure access to the users, but over a period of time, it's become more legacy oriented. We've heard many vulnerabilities that has targeted VPN technologies. We've also seen user performance issues that are faced. Another thing is VPN gives access to the network, whereas you need to be restricting your users to the application, not giving them access to the whole network. Then there is, every app should behave like a SaaS environment so that the user just clicks on the app, everything works wonderfully in the back end, multi-factor authentication, seamless SSO, that's how it moves. And obviously our goal was to have every office as a hotspot. Users can just go plug and play without having to worry about hardware, software, what goes inside that, right? And we've been able to achieve all of that over last 2 years by implementing various solutions, right? Multi-factor authentications. Now, every time I access my applications, I get a prompt on my mobile device. I really don't have to care about certificate as an example. I really don't have to care about passwords. Passwords are long gone from Akamai network. So everything is device-based now. So this is how, some of the key themes that you can get out of Zero Trust and how you can go about implementing it. As I mentioned, there are various security architectures. The first thing is obviously to assess where you are in this journey and how you can take this to a next level. So with that, I think that was just a brief introduction about how you, look at Zero Trust and what are the things that you can do. I will hand it over to my colleague Vishal, who will talk you about the implementation piece.
Thank you, Aseem. Thank you, Vivek. Good afternoon, everybody. Still everybody's awake? Let me hear that. Good afternoon. I'm Vishal, Director of Engineering for Zscaler. Just curious, how many of you have heard of Zscaler? Show of hand. Good to see. So we're a startup in the field of cloud-based security, 12-year-old, founded in California and in Bangalore at the same time. So would love to share. My content would be more about the experience that we've learned from the industry, from the field, and focus more on implementation in the solution part. But as nicely Vivek talked about, I set the context, what Zero Trust is, and Aseem talked about the assessment part of it. Typically, stumbling block is, where do I start? So here are some pointers. So first of all, it must be a business enabler. It should be driven by business needs. It should not be something, IT is always looked at as a business disabler. So that's number one. Identity and identify your biggest assets and risks in your corporations. Some of it like assessment part, which Aseem was talking about. Very important to know what are my biggest asset, which is the most important, most critical type of data. Where is my biggest risk and vulnerabilities are open, like a gap analysis. Then like again, building upon what Aseem was talking about, it's not like a rip and replace operation. You ought to find out may not be possible or feasible for most of the organization, unlike Googles of the world who can do that. So need to figure out how to reuse the existing infrastructure. And very importantly, think beyond security. Security is one part, but it's not the only part. There is things like simplification of network. As Vivek was talking about, fundamentally, Zero Trust is about network transformation. That's where it requires biggest stumbling block. How do I simplify? Do I need a hybrid cloud capability, mobility, and compliances? Finally, don't expect this to be solved in a day. It will be an ongoing process. In terms of implementation approach, need to think about really what kind of network architecture. How do I separate? How do I set the context between apps and the user directly? And we will look at some of those examples in more details. How can I eliminate DMZs and VPN? As Aseem mentioned, it's a thing of past. It's exposing your network basically, and it gives attack points to the attackers. No trusted network. How do I get away from it? And how can I remain cloud agnostic? Access management is key to it. It needs to be centralized, to be adaptive. Because no matter whether you're working from home or from office, it should work the same way. And I would go on to say that where is your application? So it should not matter whether the application is in the cloud or is sitting in your data center. It should still work the same way. Identify legacy. A lot of times you have, and most of the time large companies will have a legacy they can't just replace. So if we can't replace, at least microsegment, isolate it. Very important, the traffic and data discovery. How much traffic growth I'm seeing in my organizations. Where is my data flowing from where to where? And this traffic growth has a deep impact because about scalability. You need to start thinking from the day one, how will I handle my scale? Where is my scale? What is my scale requirement? Good to see that DSCI itself has put it in the theme here. And then finally, appliance versus cloud-based solutions. Do I really want to go and manage thousands of appliances, or are there cloud-based solution available? So these are some implementation approaches. But let me just walk through a little bit how or what we are seeing in the industry, the pain points for large organizations. So typically, we see a very large organization's network is something like this, where they have a distributed office locations, and they have 2 or 3 large data centers, which are connected. The gateway to the internet is through those data centers, and we have all the legacy systems in the data centers, and all your branch offices connected through MPLS through to those. And all your security infrastructure is essentially in your data center with an outbound gateway, which includes things like firewall and URL filtering, sandboxing, and DLP, data leakage prevention, all those kind of technologies. And most of the time, these will be different vendors, so multiple boxes tied together. And then you have an inbound gateway for the remote users to coming in, load balancers, the firewalls, the VPN gateways. So idea is here, you secure your network, the perimeter he was talking about, and you think we are secure. So this is a legacy as per what the zero trust model is talking about. Because why? Because if you see, more and more the applications are moving to the cloud, and it is nobody can deny that. And what happens is, if you go through this security architecture, the IT will force you to go through your data centers. It not only creates latencies, it also exposes you. For example, a remote user. The remote user has to go out for the internet, come back through the inbound gateway, then back out through the outbound gateway, and then back. So it's a poor experience for VPN users. And then cloud vendors will force you to connect you directly, because or whether it's O365 or any of the vendors. And when you do that, what happens? You are exposing the users to the unsecured traffic, and one user gets infected and come back to your trusted network. There you go. So it's not only about providing security to your applications. In fact, what we started with the idea was it's the user who needs to be secured. So every single user has to be thought about and provided security for. Not Petya, if you've heard of this. All of these attack vectors went like that. So that's where the zero trust, but real need comes in. How do we do it? How do we make it people, network, device, data, I would say location and application agnostic? So here's a 4 key tenets, what you heard from Vivek's also. Connect users to app without bringing them to a network. So there is no trusted network. Never expose your applications to unauthorized users. So your applications in the cloud are existing, but they're not available or published. It's only available to the authorized user. Segment apps, not segment network. And for example, the apps he was talking about also, financial-based app, highly critical, highly confidential. And based on user privileges, every session or connection needs to go through verification and authorization check. And finally, remote access over internet, not over VPN. So this is again a reference architecture with a cloud-based platform, which we are built, and we are built in the cloud and for the cloud from the get-go. So bottom you see a typical enterprise with people in headquarters, people in their branch offices, or people in the mobile. In the top, there are really 3 types of destination traffic for users. Either they will be going for internet deployed apps, cloud apps on the internet, or it would be your private apps in your own data clouds like AWS, GCP, or Azure, or it could be an app which is in your data center itself. So how do you provide all these 3 types of access through a uniform way without bringing them onto a network which is your network? So first of all, you need various type of traffic forwarding technologies. Whether it's a SD-WAN, that's where you can see GRE tunnels, IPsec, or could be a client which is on your device. And then it needs to go through a platform, identity-aware proxy, as Aseem's deck was talking about, which needs to be very scalable, so it can handle and apply policies seamlessly onto internet traffic, Same way it can apply the policies whether the traffic is going through your private cloud or whether it is going to your data center. So the old network is all about protecting your network. The new network is basically the internet is the network. So you have to create a shield around the internet, and that's exactly what Zscaler does. And the new security is all about based on business policies which are applied from a user to app, irrespective of the network, irrespective of the device, irrespective of the location. And it needs to handle scale. So when we do that, you actually end up replacing quite a bit of hardware. You can, and that brings a lot of simplicity in your network architecture. It brings a lot of cost savings. What kind of those things can be replaced? Your outbound gateway, all of the devices doing DLP, SSL decryption, URL filtering can be completely removed from your data center. Your inbound gateway can be completely removed or can be highly simplified. Of course, you will need the stack to protect the applications. And then how the transformed network looks like, this is the old one where you have the 3 big data centers connected to the gateway. And the new one, you have every branch office connected directly to the internet, but through a cloud-based security layer. So there is no data center routing happening anymore. And you can even get rid of the MPLS traffic that it is showing. And a lot of customers, for example, Tata Global Beverages, and many of them are literally removing MPLS and getting the cost savings. Some important considerations, think scale. Many customers we see they get hit hard here, and cloud adoption. So you need to look what kind of cloud technologies you're adopting. For example, O365, because when you do that, suddenly there's a surge in internet-bound traffic. And when that happens, if you are on the old legacy style box-based network security architecture, it will crumble. It cannot handle. SSL decryption is highly, highly important. Today, 80% of all internet traffic is in the enterprise layer is SSL, HTTPS. And 65% of all attack vectors are now going through SSL. So if you cannot decrypt SSL at scale, you are basically letting go 80% of your traffic without inspecting high vulnerability. Then finally, what are the advantages? Very simply speaking, better user experience, better security, reduced cost, and simplified network. Or kya chahiye? It's like a no fog security or zero fog security, right? Zero trust security. So just to, we already talked about most of this. Business risks gets lowered. Local internet breakouts give you better experience and reduces cost. And then you get a very seamless access to your private apps. It doesn't matter where you're coming from. Finally, are there any disadvantages? There are some. If I would say, it requires a lot of mindset change, requires courage, because you're talking about a new thinking of architecture. But companies like GE, I was earlier talking, such a huge 400,000, close to 400,000 employees have been able to do it, completely redefine their architecture just to meet this. Because if we don't do it, we are more unsecured. Then maybe some new hardware and software, there's gradual process, no overnight, no single solution. You may lose some control. IT people don't like that. And finally, box huggers maybe. There's one anecdotal. We had a meeting with the CIO, and we asked how many internet gateways you have. So first he said 3, and then he said, oh, wait, let me correct. I have 10,000. We were like, what are you talking about, 10,000 internet gateways? He said, I have 10,000 employees. Then he said, wait, make it 30,000. He said, why? Because every employee has a laptop, and he has 1 or 2 devices. Each one of those is a hotspot, like literally Aseem was saying, every location is a hotspot. I think every device is a hotspot. So we need to think like that. That has to go through. With that, I will end it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vishal. So hello everyone. I'm Manish. I'm part of Infosys Information Security Group, and so we have heard our friends starting about the implementation and how we can implement it and the best practices for the zero trust. So before we start, so trust is an interesting word, isn't it? So it's like an application. On the front end, we say we trust our employees and employees are our key and everything. But on the back end, we say don't trust. Always verify, always validate. So this is quite interesting. So we will just continue with the context set by our friend, and we will see that is zero trust really working for organization, or is it just a buzzword? See, zero trust has been in the news around the security conferences, around the topic of interest of all the security conferences, and even including the RSA and everywhere in 2018, and the trend continues. So there has to be something in the zero trust which is forcing all the leaders across security industry to talk about it, or to adapt or not adapt is a different thing altogether. So is it just a buzzword? So buzzword, because we have seen that zero trust talks about micro-segmentation, software-defined networks, and much more stuff. So whether it's really achievable, it's really realistic or not realistic, because we already have a large environment. We already have a large number of devices which are there on the network, which are there on the network. So are we really ready to change those devices into the micro-segmentation mode and change the complete architecture? So also when we talk about adapting a zero trust model, so there are plenty of challenges which will be faced by an organization, a typical organization of any size and any diversity. So like complex heterogeneous architecture. So Infosys being an employee scale of 200,000 plus. So we have a typical heterogeneous architecture wherein employees have work on the endpoint, on the cloud, applications, and everything. So moving everything which is already set up by the various devices and moving that into the micro-segmentation or the software-defined network is not an easy task. It's a pretty tedious. And whatever investments we have already done on that infrastructure, I'm sure we cannot ask our finance to just go away with that and include the new next-gen firewalls or all that SDN concepts and everything, which will definitely not be liked by anyone. Then legacy systems. Every organizations will have the legacy systems which will not support the zero trust architectures or the models, which don't recognize that what is a micro-segmentation and all that concepts behind. So I will also talk about user experience. So user experience, so on one side we can say that user experience will be good because when you don't have a firewall, you don't have a VPN to connect, but at the same time, the user experience can take a big hit because we are restricting the access. With a zero trust model, we are saying we are going on the least privilege mode. We are only giving you the access which is only required for you. But in this world where every organization is riding on the agility, they talk about agility where they are going on a concept of failing fast approach. So if I will apply zero trust on a practical approach, do you really think that it will work? The developer want an administrator access in everything they are building. So if I am going with a zero trust architecture, I will not be able to provide any access to what they are looking for. So I am just talking about a very practical scenarios on the challenges that what we have seen at Infosys, because coming onto the, security, so I am basically security architect at Infosys. So we handle all the requests coming from the different variety of users, developers, IT administrators, and everywhere. So that's the regular challenges that what we see over there. So like has been mentioned earlier by Aseem and Vishal, so zero trust is a strategy. It's not a technology. So what I meant by that is you cannot buy it. If it's a technology, definitely I can pay some price and I can buy it. But it's a strategy which I need to adapt. So typically we talk about monolithic applications and building and breaking that monolithic applications. So zero trust is trying to solve a problem of the traditional mindset of only going with a firewall or only securing your north to south traffic. However, in this digital era, wherein we don't have any typical boundaries in the terms of devices or the network, wherein we are using cloud application and everything on a mobile environment. So we need to look something which can enforce my security levels in a better and more secure way. So that's what we are talking. It's an architectural approach which cannot be achieved in a day, like has been. So I just want to re-emphasize this again. I would like to say it again that it's not a security product. So I was just going through an article some days back. So there are about more than 50 vendors who claim that their products are zero trust compliant. So when we talk about vendors or the product which are zero trust compliant, so they may have enabled some of those features in that product which is getting us closer to that zero trust. But if we are again missing on that basic concepts, so I got a new next gen firewall, but I am still failing on the basic principle. I am the admin of that next gen firewall is still having the full access, or if I am not reviewing those access of the next gen firewall, even after having those devices also, I will not be able to achieve any zero trust. So like I have mentioned, so it's an architecture. It's so like any of the architecture or the best practices or the guidelines that what we have in the industry, like NIST or the others. So this needs to be viewed as a part of a good reference model and a cyber security architecture. And as we all know, all the architecture needs to be custom tailored as per the organization need, as per the security requirement, as per your posture, as per your security posture. So what we can adapt the best security practices out of this again, and zero trust. So like what we are already mentioning, that zero trust is focusing on the basic principle of information security, which are there from decade, I would say, since the time the information security started. But this just has become a buzzword now, or because we have tied it now with an architecture, so this is going into a big phenomena. But if we are sticking on to the basic principle of identity and access management, access on least privilege, access on need to know, and doing the logging and monitoring on all the workloads, so are not we good? We are good. That's what we actually want to achieve. So I just summarized these things in the 4 pillars. See, so from a service organization perspective, I won't embrace any of the particular vendor or the technology here. So what we are saying is that any one technology cannot suffice your security posture. You need to embrace multiple securities, multiple technologies, or multiple things to attain a zero trust. So identity protection is at the core of the zero trust, because zero trust is a data centric approach where we talk about that how you are protecting your data. And so it's an identity driven approach. So when we are talking about identity protection, so if we are authenticating users, we are governing access and securing interactions. See, the biggest challenge that the security industry sees is that malwares, phishing, or anything. So these are mostly because of the access management or identity protection. A user because of the escalation privileges and the access that users have. So if we are using multi-factor authentication or just-in-time access or privilege access manager, so to reduce that access, to limit that access, I'm sure that we can refine that attack surface to a large extent. And multi-factor authentication is one thing that we at Infosys has deployed across all workloads, across all users, be it you are connecting it to any critical applications, or be it you are connecting to the mobile device or anywhere. So multi-factor authentication is a must. So there are no exceptions to the multi-factor authentication on the identity protection part. See, on the data protection, data is a key element to every organization. Data is what it makes the most, be it the user, be it the device. What we cares actually is the data. So data is the core element. So, and again, I am only talking about the basic concept. I am not talking again on the high technology. So these are the concepts we are embracing, or we are working, or we are living since last 10 or 15 years or 20 years, or since the time that IT actually evolved. So protection of data using classification. Data classification is very, very important, or I would say a critical technology that has evolved in the last couple of years, using your information right management or Microsoft AIP in that manner. So you can actually classify or protect the data, that who should have access to what data at what level. And you can actually set an expiry date also, that when the data will be expired. So it's all about protecting your data and keeping it safe at your organization level. And you can always use DLP. CASB, I have put CASB because we are using data at different workloads. So data visibility is a major problem which most of the organizations suffer. So we need to know my data, what are the sanctioned apps or what are the unsanctioned apps, what the users are using, because I have enabled, maybe I have enabled an internet access through proxy, but still I don't know that what is the data they are transferring. Most of your tools will not even capture the data which you are transferring through a SaaS application or a PaaS platform. So CASB is a very important element which has evolved and which we are using a big time to know what is our shadow IT proposition, as well as to get a detail of our sanctioned or unsanctioned app, and to get a complete visibility of the data, what the employee is transferring it onto the clouds. Device protection. So device protection is one of the other key pillar of zero trust, because the concept that what we always talk about is trust is user protection or the identity protection, wherein the device that on which the user will be logging into the system, if that device only is compromised, you cannot, that identity protection will not even help. So you need to enforce device protection, wherein you know that what is the device that user is using to log in to the corporate assets, and if that device can be trusted or not. If plus, so I will just add another parameter here. So nowadays we are accessing everything from the mobile, and if the device, if your mobile is not, if your mobile get lost, and if you have all the corporate data over that device, so all your data is out. So we are in very much position now that we need to secure all the devices, be it your endpoint, be it your laptop, desktop, mobile devices, or anything. So few of the solutions that I have listed out here that we can use to isolate or to secure or to contain the data, like mobile device management or conditional access. Conditional access is a great tool which we use to for application for locking down the applications to be accessed by the particular environments. And then EDR is again endpoint detection response. So coming on to the network protection, which is the last part for the zero trust. So network protection. So network protection is the key, is again one of the pillar for zero trust protection. But they talk about in the zero trust architecture. If I will talk particularly about the zero trust, so they talk about having a micro segmentation, breaking down your network into the micro segmentation, so that you have a visibility into the different segments. But that may not be possible for organization size like Infosys. We are adapting the SDN concept, the software defined networking. But considering the huge size of the network, so we are required to adapt force to the other security parameters like NAC controls, proxy, or IPS. And in addition to that, so these are at the top layer that you can have at the identity, data, or device. But what is most important now is monitoring and reporting and analytics. So monitoring is very important. So at Infosys, I just give a hypothetical figure. So we collect around more than 8 TB of log data per day. So that's huge. So when I got to know about it, I was asking my SIM analytics that are you serious? Are you, or is it some so you have some error? So but that's true, and it's growing. It's not that it's reducing, it's growing. So when you have so huge or vast amount of data, so do you really think that it is normal to analyze, or it is very easy to analyze, or if you don't have any kind of analytics platform built on top of that which can provide you the real alerts instead of the false positives and everything, so you won't be able to utilize the full feature of that SIM. In top of that, so in the today's digital world, so utilizing the other technologies like ATA and UEBA, user event and behavior analytics, and advanced threat protection is also few of the technologies that Infosys leverage to protect the surface. And so again, I just want to say that it's a defense in depth approach that Infosys takes to build that zero trust architecture for the entire organization, and that's how we have attained it. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for enlightening us more on zero trust. Thank you. We'll have a next session.